Hello and welcome, dear listeners. Episode 191 of the Reformed Gamers, the show about theology, video games, and making some board games. I'm your host, Logan.
I'm his co-host, Adam, and joining us, longtime friend, longtime mentor, pastor in Rochester Hills, Michigan, Mr. Adam Hill. Adam, introduce yourself briefly. Give a little brief background of who you are, what you do, and yeah, that's that. We can start off with that because we got a lot to talk about later. So I don't want to get too deep into it right now. But
All right.
give the people a little bit of introduction.
So here's the deal, dear listeners. I think I got that right. I am Adam Hill. I am the minister of the word, senior pastor at Rochester Church of Christ in Rochester Hills, Michigan. I also teach at Rochester University, not the one you've heard of in New York, but the one that's in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And then I also am a board game designer and publisher. And so look forward to talking gaming with y'all, even though I'm not exactly as digitally. This is the analog edition.
There we go.
Of talking about games here when you bring me on, but I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Video games in 6D like you find in some foreign countries, and you're like, how do they have all these different Ds in these movie theaters? I think they're throwing water, and this is what we got with our board gaming. So just to give a little bit more background on Adam, Adam was one of my professors in college. He mentored me in a small group, so I may even reference him as Papa Dragon every once in a while. That was his name in our mentorship group.
That's right.
When Hannah and I got married, we were living in Rochester. I got to do really a little. I mean, we didn't get to do as much because we were really only in Rochester for a short season of life. But we came over, and that one night, I think you introduced us to Dominion, and that's when I really got a little glimpse of how crazy Adam was when it comes to board games, because he's like, here's Dominion and my 85 expansions that come with Dominion, and I'm like, what is happening right now? And so we played Dominion, and I don't remember the other. I think we played another game, but I can't remember what it was. But it was just a good time getting to, for you to get to meet Hannah, having known me in college, and then so for her to get to meet you and your wife, and it stinks that we're, I don't know how many miles away from each other now, but there will be a time, it is going to happen, where I'm back in the hills of Rochester, and we will be playing some board game together. And maybe Godspeed, and maybe something else, but it's going to happen. I'm going to make sure it happens.
Or I just have to make it to upstate New York, right?
Hey, this is the Lord's country up here. We got rolling hills. We've got beautiful lakes. Now you may think, oh, New York, you think of New York City. We are about as Midwest as you can get in New York.
Right.
It's kind of crazy how just culturally upstate New York, they call it the North Country, is very Midwest. Blue collar.
What I love about upstate New York is that there is, in the state of New York, there is New York City and everything else that is called upstate.
Yeah, right. And you did. I'm trying to remember now that you say that, you did some schooling out this way, didn't you? In the East Coast.
Philadelphia. I was down in Philadelphia. I went to Westminster Theological Seminary for my doctorate.
Yeah, I remember you. As we were talking, I remember you being over in this neck of the woods, and Philly's only 4 hours or so from us, 4.5 hours.
Oh,
so it's really not that far. So,
all right. Well, yeah. If I might have to, we may have to take a trip out to.
Hey, you always got a place to stay at the Southern.
Make a house call.
Hey, that would make my year if the hills came to the hills of upstate New York. Anyways, so that's a little bit of background. Adam was sharing some stories in the pre-show, and he had me nervous for a second because he's seen me. Adam knew me pre-Hannah. And so Adam in college was wanting to find a wife, and the Lord hadn't had that set out for me yet. And so he talked me off a couple ledges. He actually oversaw my senior thesis, or whatever we call it, senior symposium.
Yeah.
I think my subject was the postmodern emerging church.
Oh,
what
wow.
a title of back when the emerging church was a thing that people talked a lot about.
It's emerged. That's what. There's no need to talk about it in the present anymore.
It has emerged. And so that was what my senior paper was on. And so I got to, Adam oversaw my presentating of that. And so we go way back, but I'm super excited to have him to talk. We had Clay Hargrave. Adam and Clay created Godspeed. Clay is definitely, if we're talking about, it's not marrying up, but developing up or designing up. Clay designs up with Adam, so I'm happy to have the the better of the two partners in our podcast now. And so hopefully we'll have to make sure Clay listens to this.
Yes, we will. But Clay did marry up too. I mean,
no
Clay
doubt,
put everything up. I'm just saying.
It's been really cool, whether it's Clay, whether it's Logan, how, and I'll just speak from my personal, how God has used this podcast, video games, board games to reconnect me with many people in my life. So Logan was, living with Logan at seminary. This podcast has really kept us as close as almost we've ever been, talking multiple times a week, touching base with Clay, getting to stay in contact with him. Now, been tweeting back and forth at Adam for a long time. Now getting to have him on here. I'm just super grateful to see how all of my worlds are colliding on this hobby that Logan and I get to have on a podcast talking video games every other week. So Adam, I'm super thankful to have you.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you're having me on. Thank you.
Introduce all of our dear listeners to who you are and what you're doing. So Logan, I'll let you take lead from here because I'm going to, I'll be jumping back in later as we really get into some of the topic of the show.
Sounds good. So, dear listeners, we have a pretty awesome episode lined up for you. But before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping, a few things. I just want to let you know right out of the gate, Skinner is on vacation. And so that means that I'm editing this episode. So if it sounds bad, you can send all of your angry letters to adam@thereformedgamers.com. I'm kidding. That's not even a real email address. So it would just go nowhere and get lost in the void of the internet. But for real, be gracious. I haven't edited an episode of the podcast in a long time. So if it sounds wonky, be nice to me. That being said, there's also some new content y'all should check out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thereformedgamers. Micah put up a video talking about why you should play Returnal. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later and kind of balance out his very enthusiastic, very well-designed and edited video. But no, it's a good video. You should go check it out. And there's a few other videos on the channel as well that you should definitely check out. But that is youtube.com/thereformedgamers. And as Adam was talking about earlier, if you want to get the pre-show and listen to what Adam was like in those formative years, patreon.com/thereformedgamers. Support as low as $1 a month gets you early uncut access to all of our episodes. So you get to hear the funny stories that don't make it into the public feeds. But without further ado, let's get into the show like we always normally do with a little bit of what have we been playing. And now as I look at the show notes, it is a good thing I distinguish which Adam is which, because Adam Hill, I'm going to have you go first, man, and let the dear listeners know what you have been playing recently.
All right. So recently, that Mortal Kombat movie came out.
Yeah.
And boy, it took me back. I was excited because back when I was like college age, high school age, Mortal Kombat was there, the Sega Genesis when I was growing up. And so we played it from the very beginning and on. And then we saw this movie, and the movie it's a terrible movie. I want to be clear about that. And I love how much time they devote to trying to make this story make sense in that movie. Like, sure, whatever, we'll grant it to you. It's sort of like what they did with Godzilla versus Kong. Like they really invested themselves in trying to explain the story. Totally unnecessary, but I appreciate their effort. Nevertheless, watched the movie with my son and kind of introduced him to the world of Mortal Kombat. And then he was like, I think that game is on PlayStation. And so we were like, let's do this. So we picked up Mortal Kombat and we've been playing it. And I am just as good at button mashing now as I was back then. And so I'm really trying to master one character. Of course, in that same time, my son has already figured out all the characters.
Sure. And he's like fatality, and you're like, this game is gory. You're like, this is graphic. I don't know if we should be playing this together.
Yeah, well, he's 14, and so he kind of gets it. But no, there are times that he's like, whoa, your eyes just fell out. And I'm like, well, that's because you chose to do that to me. We'll talk about repentance later.
He's like, I've seen that in Among Us. He's like, they, stabbing people from behind, cutting their heads off.
Exactly. So Mortal Kombat would be my video game that I've been playing recently. I'm not good at it, but I enjoy it. And then I'll pick one board game real quick, a tabletop game. It's a party game, actually, and I don't usually play a lot of party games. But this one it's called Just One. And basically, the conceit of the game is that there is a guesser. Every time, everyone takes turns guessing. You pull out a card and it's got 5 words on it. So it may have like butterfly, Wizard of Oz, whatever. 5 topics. And you pick 1 through 5. You don't get to read which topics are. You're just blindly picking 1 through 5. So you pull your card and say 4 and show the card to everyone else. And they look at 4 and it says dinosaurs, right? Well, then each one of them has to write a 1-word clue to get you to guess dinosaurs. And so everyone writes, right? 6 or 7 people are writing a clue to make you guess dinosaur. But then before I get to look at those clues, they show them to one another. And if there are any duplicates, then those get thrown out. So like the obvious ones, like T-Rex and Brontosaurus or something like that, get thrown out. But and so then when it's my turn to actually look, I look at the clues and what I get is Ancient and Barney.
Okay.
And I'm like, Ancient Barney, what in the world does that mean? And so I end up going with Flintstones, and I'm wrong, right? And the point is for all of us, you want me to guess it, but the neat part is you can't use the obvious ones, but then sometimes you start overthinking it and no one writes the obvious thing. It's grapes and no one writes fruit. Because they just know it's going to get doubled up and kicked out. And so that game's fun. They tell you how to keep score. It doesn't matter. It's one of those games you don't really, it's like apples to apples and stuff. You don't really keep score.
Okay. It's more just for the fun than it's actually
a fun
winning.
Experience. So played just one recently, really enjoyed it.
Nice. Right on. So I got to know 2 questions about Mortal Kombat. First of all, which Mortal Kombat were y'all playing?
We ended up playing Mortal Kombat X.
Okay, X. Okay. And you said you were trying to learn one character. What character is that?
Raiden.
Oh man. Okay. Fair enough. I can respect that. I'm more of a Sub-Zero guy myself, but that's me.
Well, now here's the other question. Was the new Mortal Kombat better or worse than the old one?
Better? I'm going to go with better. That was better with a question mark.
So all I heard was you saying that you really loved it. Now I put you in a no-win there. So.
That's right.
The subheading is Adam thinks Mortal Kombat's a great movie. The old one.
If nothing else, the special effects are way better.
Yeah, that's true.
Have you seen it, Logan? Have you seen the new one?
I haven't seen the movie. No.
Yeah,
I should say I watched the first 15 minutes or whatever, the opening, and then I got distracted. Like I have a hard time just sitting down and watching TV shows and movies as of late. So like I sat down for 15 minutes. It's like, oh, this was a cool opening. And then I went and did something else.
And you're like, I should be playing a video game right now.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I was like, why watch Mortal Kombat when I could literally play it as the Terminator?
There you go.
So, but yeah. Adam, man, what about you? What have you been, the other Adam, what have you been playing?
The other Adam, the second Adam. You don't want to be the first one.
The handsome bearded man.
Yeah, so not a lot of surprises here if you've been listening to us over the last little bit. So I've been playing some more MLB The Show. Definitely not as much as I was originally. It's just, again, there's so much time that you can play games. But I've been doing a lot of the thing that I still really like about this game is I can pick it up and play for 15 minutes and feel like I'm accomplishing stuff. So I'm still working on like my Diamond Dynasty team. I'll jump in there and do some of these different moments. So it's like, hit 2 extra base hits in this game. Oh, I completed. I feel like, I didn't complete anything because I'm just playing a video game, but I feel like I accomplished something in my life. So I've been playing a little bit of that when I can. I really want to get into playing some more online. I've done it a couple times. I won once or twice. I've got smacked a couple times by some dudes because I'm like, it doesn't matter where I put the ball. They like just crushing home runs. I'm like, it's probably because I'm playing guys like Cooper, Adam's son, who's just nasty at these games, and just like, oh, some old guys over here playing against me with his janky pitcher. But anyways, been playing some more MLB The Show.
At the end of the game, he'll hit you with that GG EZ.
Oh yeah, GG smiley face just to really rub it in.
Yeah.
Like, good game, brother. And I'm like, yikes. Well, the thing is, here's my biggest kicker when I play online. Most of the time when I'm playing that game, I'm playing in some mode where I'm either just batting or just pitching. Even when I play like Road to the Show, I'm only playing with like the shortstop. when I'm in the field. So whenever I play an actual game online, I'm like jacking up all over the place. Like I'll go to throw it to, I'll try, get a ground ball, try to throw it to first base. If you hit the button twice, they pump fake. And so I'll hit it, not thinking I'll hit it again. Now the guy just got a single when it should have been out. I make so many errors in the field because I never play, like, that's the only time I play an actual full game of baseball.
I'm with you on that pump fake. I am so good at almost throwing the ball to wherever I want it to go.
And so definitely been enjoying that. I mean, it's a good time. But the game I've really been consumed with, probably in ways I shouldn't be, is Returnal. This game it's so good. It's starting getting to the point where, like with a lot of roguelikes, where there's a very fine line of constantly when I'm playing it, why am I doing this to myself? Like,
I know that
why
feeling.
do I keep wasting? Like, it hit me. I was getting there the other night. I was in the middle. Like, it's really bad. Hannah laughs at me. We'll go to bed at like, I don't know, 11:30. And she's like, you want to watch something? I'm like, no, I've moved my PlayStation to the bedroom because that's like the best chance that I'm going to have to play video games with kids and everything. So it's like, I'm just going to play a little bit of Returnal. I'm going to play for a little bit. I'll play for an hour or so.
This is
well,
great.
3 a.m.
Hold on. I love that this story's premise is I'm in bed. My wife says, do you want to watch something together? And you say, nah, I might just play video games for an hour.
Well, here's the thing. We watch a lot of TV together in our house. So that's not like, we're really bad with the television. Like, it's like pretty much always on as background noise. So it's not like we've neglected watching television together. That's never the case in our house.
My question wasn't so much about the television as it was her, but yeah.
Oh, sure.
Gotcha.
So I'm playing, and this game has one of those hooks of, okay, I'm going to go one more room. There's no save, so you're always kind of risking, if I die, I'm done. Or if I put it in rest mode and my we have a power surge or the game decides to update, I could lose it all. So there's already like, I need to go until I die. But there's always this one more. And so there's been like multiple nights over the last week and a half where I'll start at 11:30 and it's like 2:30, 3 a.m. and I'm like,
oh my gosh.
Okay, I've got to go to bed, but I don't want to, like, I'm in the middle. Usually it's because I'm in a really good run. So Adam, just to give you a little bit of background on this game, basically it's a really hard game. It's like Metroid meets Doom. You're running around like crazy. It's like there's stuff, bullets all over the screen, and you're just trying to survive. But every time you die, you go back to the beginning of the beginning of the game. It's like an arcade game. So when you die, you start over. And so you're always like, and you want to get a little bit further every time, and you're not really even carrying over a lot of your different things. So the reason I've been playing so late is I get so deep in a run. I'm like, I can't stop because I don't want to, I need to accomplish something. So a couple nights ago, it's like 2:30 and I finally got to one of the bosses. And so once you beat a boss, you can kind of skip ahead to that level, to the next level, and not have to like keep playing. So I'm like, I don't want to have to do all this again. So I'm like, I pause it. I go to YouTube. I watch someone fight this boss like 3 times to try to prepare myself as best as I can. And I'm like, I don't want to have to do this again. And by God's grace, I counted a grace that I beat this boss on my first time. And you would have thought I just, won the World Series. My heart was pumping out of my chest.
Did you wake your wife up?
I couldn't.
Hey, get up.
Yeah, you're missing it. She's like, what are you doing? Stop it. And so, I mean, I couldn't, I probably was awake for 15 minutes, just wait for my heart to calm down. I'm like, I'm too old for this type of action this late. And so, but the game is so good. It's just got a great gameplay loop, but it does, there are moments where I get super frustrated. And Logan, maybe you can speak to some of this. Like, there's a couple times where because I know what is ahead of me, I almost rush it early, and I'll die doing stupid stuff because I'm just trying to build up my character to get to where I can go to like the next level and get to that boss. And so as a result, I almost waste more time because I'm trying to play it, fast and loose throughout the beginning part of the game. And all of a sudden I'm just dying a lot and I'm like, ah. And so like today I played it while the kids were taking a nap on my off day. And I got to where I was going to the boss in the third level, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna pause it here. But I knew like that was like the kids were getting up from that, and that was like all that was on my mind. I'm like, this is bad. I gotta calm down. So like we're putting them in, I'm like, I need 10 minutes. The kids are in the bath. I'm gonna go and try and fight this boss. So I get to the boss and I died, and I'm like, what was this? What was all this even for? And so I'm like, it's that brutal loop of a roguelike game where I'm like, I know I got to start back over, but the great thing is the game's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
It is like an arcade game. It makes you want to keep putting that quarter in and keep trying to get further and further and further. But it is brutal when you die and you feel like you just lost an hour of your life, when getting an hour of video game time is like, it's like finding gold when you've got two little ones. So,
Yeah.
but I love it. It's a great game. Logan, I'll throw it to you, and you can jump into what you've been playing and kind of give some of your thoughts about it.
Yeah. It's kind of funny listening to you talk about the game and your thoughts on it, because we're pretty similar in a lot of our experiences with the game and kind of our thoughts on the game. Man, it really is when you're saying, what's ahead of you and you wind up rushing things and kind of setting yourself up for disaster. Man, that's the thing about this game, is you can't let your impatience kind of get the best of you, because it really will. It's just, it'll put you in for a bad time, to say the least. But at the same time, it's like you don't want to invest too much time running around in the beginning areas trying to build your character up or get weapons or gear or whatever it is, artifacts, whatever it's called. Because then, like, if you get to that point where you die, then you feel like you just wasted however long it took you to get through that last run. And so it's an interesting game, in a few ways. I think your comparison of Metroid meets Doom is very accurate, because the combat is as fast and frenetic as it is in Doom and Doom Eternal, but it's got a lot of nods to Metroid, especially with the statues of the ancient alien race thing going on. It reminds me a lot of the Chozo from Metroid. And it also helps that Celine is a really cool female space explorer sort of person. But I mean, I go back and forth with this game a lot, and you can ask friends of the show, Colin and Michael, because we'll be in a voice chat talking about the game, and we'll do our runs, and we know someone's not having a good night when they say, "I hate this game," you know. But like a sucker, we're gonna start up another run, and so we try it out. I don't know, man.
And then it gets its hooks in you. You could have a horrible hour of playing. Then you have one good run, and you're like,
and then it hooks you.
And then you're like, okay, and you beat the boss, and you're like, this is why I come back. But then you just get beat down for the next 3 hours in the new level trying to figure out all the enemies. It is a vicious cycle.
And that's something that happened to me the other night. I was like, man, I hate this game. I don't want to play it anymore. But then I had a really good run where I got some really good perks and a really good weapon, and everything set up really well. And then I went and fought the third boss and somehow managed to take that thing down in my first try. I'm convinced it was because some of the perks I had, where if my health gets low, it just starts auto repairing my health. I'm convinced that was the only reason I really got past it. And then after I did that, I was like, oh man, like this is that hit of dopamine that I needed to keep going. And then of course I started going into the next area, and then I die real quick. I'm like, oh, forget this game. I'm done. I'm going to go to bed. So it's
humbling.
It's a I don't know how to describe it exactly, but you will oscillate. You will go back and forth between this game is fun, it is amazing, to I hate this game, I don't want to play it anymore. But I will say this, I do like a lot of what's going on in the game. I wish the RNG, I don't know how to phrase this. Either I wish it wasn't so reliant on RNG, or if the RNG was a little more balanced. And I think this is just typical of almost all roguelikes. There's some runs you don't get good rolls on anything, and so you might as well just restart. But like I'm still surprised that Housemarque made this because it's so different than what they've normally done, and I think the emphasis that they've done on the story and the audio logs and everything, like, it's it's really well done. I love it, and I think this is one of my big complaints about Hades was I hated how when you die in that game, you get sent back to the main hub area, and then you have to talk to all these characters, and I feel like it just really kinda gets in the way of the gameplay and kinda really brings an abrupt stop to the flow of the game. Whereas Returnal, you're picking up audio logs as you go. And so you have the option to stop and listen and kind of take a breather or just run into the next area and you're still listening to it. And so you're still getting a story and you're still getting those elements, but it's not getting in the way of the gameplay. And that's what I really love about it is that it's gameplay first, story second. But the cool part is both of those are really well developed. And so it's a fun game, but I go back and forth with this game. This is a game that is, if I were to give the flip flop award to it, like I would give it because there's times where I love this game, there's times where I hate this game, but it keeps you coming back.
I got two questions for it. Two questions for you.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what's happening in the story? Because I have no idea what's going on.
I have no stinking clue.
Okay.
I'm assuming that this ancient alien civilization found some kind of power and it drove them mad, and that's the reason for
Very Indiana
what's
Jones in
going
the
on.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls going on.
Exactly.
All right.
But
second question. How risky do you play it with like parasites and malignant stuff?
so it really depends on kind of where I'm at. Like, because before I would just pick up everything and then realize, okay, I can't do that. That's a really bad idea. Don't pick up everything that could give you malfunctions and debuffs and things that would really make you run harder. So now what I've done is when I find those, I'll read what they are and kind of weigh the options of kind of how they work. And because there was one the other night when I had a really good run, I picked up a parasite. And for those that haven't played the game, you pick up these things called parasites that will attach to you, and they give you a buff, but they also give you a debuff. And so I had one that would absorb 2 hits, or like initiate a shield or something for 2 hits or something like that. But then after that, it would detach and then give you a critical malfunction. So I picked that up and one other one that would cause a malfunction when it detached. But I had an item that would remove all my malfunctions. So I was like, I'm okay. So I really try to pay attention to what the different items do and if I can get anything that will work together. So I try to play a little more smart than that. I used to play pretty risky, but now I'm like, I'm gonna pay attention to what some of these are doing and go from there.
I've definitely jumped into that because that's how I've had to adjust to that because there was a while where I was just risking everything. But there's a couple times I had a good run going, but I had a couple parasites I couldn't get rid of, and I had to like I couldn't, it either took away my dash or slowed my dash down, and so that really can be a big part of it. Adam, you got a question for us?
I have a question about like how does in what way does random number generation play in? Like how does RNG work in this particular game? Because I've not played it.
So kind of how it works is that every single time that you die in the game and you start a new run, the level changes and everything about it changes from the enemies to the weapon placement to where everything is. It just completely randomly generates every single time. And so the stats on your guns are different whenever you pick them up. The items or the consumables are different. The artifacts you pick up are different. The parasites are different. Everything is different. And so RNG just rolls the dice, and then what you get in the different chests and things like that is what you get, and then you kind of go from there. But yeah,
that's crazy. In board games, we talk about randomness in 2 different ways. There's input randomness and there's output randomness. Input randomness is the things that are random they happen. So like you roll dice, but those happen before you take your actions.
Okay.
And so you have all the information, but it's randomly generated, right? And then you get to take your actions based upon what you have there. Whereas output randomness is kind of what's classic of Dungeons and Dragons. You explain all your action, you do everything, and then you roll a dice to see if it works. And what we've found is people don't mind input randomness. They generally hate output randomness.
Yeah.
Because you can do everything right, but if you roll a 1, instead of like backstabbing that ogre, you caressed his back. And you're like,
Well, that's
not the way
like, again,
think of it."
I think of some games that you like. So output would be like Catan in some ways, where you could have you feel like you have the perfect places, but if you don't roll the right dice, then
You just
so
feel
be
like
it.
the game jobbed you, right? Like the game
Yeah.
toased you the whole game
Yep.
because that it didn't come up. Yeah, okay, that kind of feeling is that output randomness feeling, whereas input is like, okay, these are not good numbers, but I can work with them.
Would that be like input with the supply depot and like Godspeed? Would that be considered input randomness?
In some ways, yes. Yes, absolutely.
You don't know what
You
cards
find
are going
out
to pop
what's in
up,
it
but then the
before you get it.
bidding.
Output randomness would be like bidding and then revealing what's in the market.
Okay.
Cool.
Little Godspeed insider there. I'm needing these tips. I could probably do a podcast with just Clay and Adam saying, "Hey, are we playing this game right?" Because there's sometimes I've made some house rules up where I'm like, I'm not quite sure if this is right, but this is how we play it in this household.
That's awesome.
That honestly might be a good episode or YouTube video. Not gonna lie. So, but yeah. So anyway, that's Returnal. Like I said, if you want Micah's thoughts too, go check out his video and an article. Really worth watching. I've also been playing Resident Evil Village. That came out. I don't know how time works and when this releases. So it just came out recently. And the weekend that it came out, fun fact about this game, I bought it, pre-ordered it originally for the PS5. And then I was sitting there thinking, like, I don't want to fight my wife trying to play this thing on the PS5 because she was wanting to play it too. She played the demos and was like, yes, I want to play the Vampire Mama game, as people on the internet are affectionately calling it. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll do a Let's Play on the YouTube channel as well for the game. So I went ahead and picked it up for my Xbox as well and was playing it there. And kind of what wound up happening is in the course of the weekend that the game came out, I beat the game 4 times.
That's all?
That's it. I was working on a 5th one and then it didn't happen. But no, I did 2 full playthroughs on Xbox and PlayStation, and then I did 2 speed runs on Xbox and
this man has
PlayStation.
been lost his mind.
And so I think it's safe to say I really enjoy the game. I think it's way better than Resident Evil 7 was, but at the same time, it's a bit more morbid than 7 is in a few different ways. And it actually led to why I announced on Twitter I'm not going to upload a Let's Play of the game, because there's a few plot elements that I'm like, this is questionable at best. So I don't think I'm going to upload that and let people. I don't know. I feel like there would be a lot
I ain't
of.
even mad about 4 plays. That's impressive. I
You like that?
The
Like
fact that I haven't beaten a game since Turtles in Time, I think 4 times.
Yeah.
So I ain't even mad about it. That's just impressive.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about it too, is that it's fun. If you play on casual, I know people are going to knock the game because it's like, you can beat the game in 8 hours on casual. Yo, to me, that's an adult that doesn't have a whole lot of free time. That's amazing. Like, yes, please. So yeah, I took advantage of that and played it quite a bit, and it's a lot of fun. Like I said, it does get morbid at times. It's interesting about this one though, is that it's not as scary as 7. There's one place in particular that I'm sure if you get on Twitter or online anywhere, you'll have heard about, the dollhouse. That is the scariest part of the game. Everything else is just kind of not that scary. So it's an interesting. I'm sure people will have different opinions on how scary the game is or isn't on that regard. But yeah, suffice it to say, as a longtime Resident Evil fan, I think they did a really good job with this one, and I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna be honest. I'm probably going to get the platinum for this game, which is nice because I haven't chased a platinum in a game for a long time now. And then Adam, in case you don't know what a platinum is, it's basically me just doing all the achievements in the game so I can get the platinum trophy on PlayStation. That
nice, yeah,
really serves no purpose other than to just make myself feel better about myself and just have a shiny trophy on my PlayStation profile. But yeah, Resident Evil Village, man, I will say this: here's a good barometer to ask yourself if you're interested in playing this. If you're interested in playing this game, sorry, words are hard. If you liked 7, you'll like Village. If you hated 7, don't play Village, because it's really just more of the same. But it's interesting though with Resident Evil Village, and after this I'll stop because I could literally talk about this game for the rest of the episode, and I'll save that for a future episode. this game, when you play it, if any of you are familiar with what Resident Evil 4 was originally supposed to be, this game feels like what Resident Evil 4 was originally supposed to be. And so it's really interesting at how they took a lot of the stuff from that development and managed to incorporate into here with vampire stuff and werewolves and the mansion stuff. It's pretty cool, and I think they did it really well, and it's yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I'll still be playing it. But I'll just say this though, it does earn its M rating. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll talk more in a spoiler cast that'll be coming at a later date. But that is what I've been playing as of late. But let's switch gears here and talk about what have we been reading. And Adam Hillman, what have you been getting into?
I've been reading quite a bit. I read a ton. I really enjoy it. But lately, the thing that kind of has stood out was I was reading through Mark chapter 9 again. I was in a Bible study with a young man who, he was just being really honest, and he kind of said, "I'm struggling with believing everything that we talk about at church." And I kind of said, "Well, me too. So tell me about that." And as we talked, one of his big questions is, he was really wrestling with some anger that he has in his life that when it kind of comes out, he feels like he can't control it, he can't stop it, and it's making his life something he doesn't enjoy. And so, I said, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And he said, well, why did God make me like me? Right? I feel like other people have a better chance to enjoy life and enjoy being alive. Why did God make me like me? Well, we were talking about this, and in that we started, I started talking about the Apostle Paul and how he also had this, he had this thorn in his flesh. He had this thing about himself that he didn't like, that he kept asking God to take away. God, why'd you make me like this? Take that away. And God decided not to, because he said, my strength is made perfect for you in weakness. That's, he was talking about that 2 Corinthians 12. But then we read together, though, from Mark 9, and it's one of my favorite stories about Jesus. It's probably my favorite in the Bible, where there's the guy whose son has a demon that kind of starts throwing him into the fire, throwing him into the water, and it keeps trying to kill the kid. And the dad has thus far been there to save him and pull him out, but he's asking Jesus if he'll heal his son. And actually, when Jesus walks in on the scene, there's an argument going on among the religious people. Imagine that. And
sounds like Twitter,
right? And instead of like actually focusing on things that make a difference, they're yelling at each other. And Jesus says, "What are y'all arguing about?" And then the dad comes forward and he says, "This is my son. I brought him to your disciples to see if they could heal him." And I always try and ask myself, what if these were real people? Because I believe they are, but I think sometimes we read our Bibles like it's a once upon a time story.
Yeah.
And I think about a dad, and I have a son, and I think about if my son were sick, all that I would do to try to take care of him, right? And so I think of how many times this dad has been to see a doctor, or a hedge doctor, or some kind of snake oil salesman, or whoever or whatever, to try and make his son better. And he's gotten so desperate to the point that he's willing to take some fishermen who supposedly have spent time with an itinerant carpenter who can heal. Right? If you think about the setting, that he brought him to the disciples and said, "Can you please help him?" But they weren't able to do anything. And Jesus kind of gets upset and he says, "Oh, you unbelieving generation." And then he says, "How long has he been like this?" And he says, "Since childhood." And he says, "Okay, well, bring him here." And immediately the demon makes the kid fall into a convulsion, and Jesus drives it out. Right? The guy says, "If you can do anything, please help us." And Jesus gives him this really hard line. He says, "If I can, anything is possible for someone who believes." Right? Which is super hard, because here's this guy who's watched, his big fear is that he's going to outlive his child. And he's watching this kid struggle and watching this kid wrestle with this demon that is getting the best of his kid. Right? And all of the doctors, all of the things he's done, and he's like, just believe, that's all I got to do. Well, that's a little harder than you might think. And I said, do you ever feel like that? And this guy's like, yeah, I feel exactly like that. And I said, well, look at this next verse in Mark 9:24, where the dad says, well, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. And, I think that verse really, it speaks to me in my own faith. And this young man was like, boy, that's exactly what I feel like. He's like, I want so badly to believe, but there's just some things that make it hard. And I said, here's this dad who doesn't understand everything, doesn't get everything, but he's willing to still trust. Because as much as I doubt, if I know that God is if God is even who I think God is, then I have to doubt my doubts, right? That I can't decide I'm smarter than God. And so I reached this point where I say, okay, I believe, but I need you to help me overcome my unbelief. There's this part of me that's still wrestling with all of this and doesn't make sense of it, but I need you. And I do believe. And, this young man was like, this is exactly how I feel. And I said, me too. This is why this is one of my favorite verses. And then Jesus heals the boy. We kind of talked about how sometimes your faith needs to be available even though it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. And at that point, just encouraging that young man to keep talking, keep searching, keep asking and seeking and knocking, because we don't have to believe perfectly. We have to be available to let God do His perfect work in us.
Yeah. It's amazing. I think of, okay, Adam's been doing this longer than Logan and I have, and Logan even longer than me, but as a pastor, how often I'm in that spot. Our people look at us like we've got it together. And I'm like, there's days when I'm like, Lord, I need your help today because I'm definitely not living it and I'm not feeling it. And, I'm not forsaking the faith, but I'm not believing it like I did maybe yesterday. Mm-hmm. And so just constant, Lord, I need you to help me in all these things, especially in my doubt, because, we see it doesn't take much. We laugh about Twitter, but it doesn't make much to see on the internet our broken world and saying, Lord, I know that you are working in all these things, but it is really hard to see it right now.
Right.
So no, that's good stuff. I'm going to talk about a book I think I've talked about a couple times on here. I'm in one of those stages where I'm like reading multiple books, which I never really usually do, but so it takes me a long time to finish books. But I've been reading this book called Replanted. It's on orphan care, foster adoption. And one of the things that we were reading and discussing as pastors, we're reading it as a team of pastors as God's really working in our church in this area of orphan care and foster care specifically, about how we can train our people up. Because, you guys have all experienced this, we've done it, but people in their best intentions, not even in regards to orphan care or dealing with kids coming out of hard situations, but just anytime someone is going through a hard situation, people want to say something well. They want to be an encouragement, but then they come to you and they say something that is just the most insensitive, ridiculous thing that you're like, that's it. But they are truly, sincerely trying to help and really trying to comfort, but so often we don't know what to say. And so we'll say something that really isn't helpful or is maybe, even hurtful in some ways. But we were discussing that even this week about how, how can we equip our people to really love families who are going through hard things in foster care well? Like, how do we, how do we, because people are going to, we want to have a support ministry for those families, but how do we do that well where people don't think, oh, they walk into a situation, well, if you just do this with the kid, surely that'll work. And it's like, that's not helpful. You think we haven't, first of all, tried these things, but so we were really talking about a lot of different training and trying to equip our people. But really one of those biggest things is really just, again, whether it's foster care, or just dealing with people in hard situations, of like really sitting with people we are so prone to wanting to say something or even do something instead of really sitting, listening, and grieving with them so that we can have that. And really, that can be some of the most healing work that we can be a part of is just being present, that,
Right.
that ministry of presence
Right.
and saying, hey, often I tell people, I don't have any words that I can really say that can help you, but I can sit here and I want to listen. And I do want to remind you of some promises of God, but I don't got to rush to that. I just want to be here present with you and encourage you and just being here with you. And so it was really just a good conversation for us as we try to, really, cause again, there's so many complicated things in our world. I mean, there's just so much brokenness in families and individuals, uh, and all these hot topic issues going on in our culture, but really just trying our best to sit with people and say, hey, before I try to tell you for sure what I think you could do, should do, would do, what the Bible even says, let me just sit with you and say, hey, this sucks. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry. And this hurts. And I'm grieving with you. And so it was just a really encouraging conversation for us as we try to think about, okay, when we hopefully in the coming years, our church is going to have so many, and this isn't like I'm not bragging, but we really do have a growing foster care almost ministry in our church. So Lord willing, we're going to have a lot of people loving on children coming out of hard places, but we really want to equip all those other families to love those families well. And so there's going to have to be some training that we do with that and saying, hey, the first thing that you might think you want to do is to do this, but you just might need to come alongside and hug that mom who's really going through it with this child who is also going through their stuff. And so, just really excited to see how God's working in our church and how he's growing us. Hannah and I are actually in, we're in the midst of foster care training.
Mm,
So we're in like
that's cool.
class 5 or something like that. And so don't know what that means. It could be
Yeah.
respite. It could be fostering. It could be fostering to adopt. We don't really know.
Right.
We're open to however God leads, but we're kind of scared out. One day we're scared out of our mind. The next day we're like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's take
Adam,
the sibling
one of the
care.
things I wish I had told you when I was mentoring you before, that I've kind of learned since then is that three of the most important words in ministry are tell me more.
Mm,
That when someone shares something with you, whether they open up what's on their heart, whether it's a complaint, whether it's a concern, if it's a question, one of the first things I always say to make sure that I'm doing that presence thing to sit there and
yeah.
listen is to start with, tell me more about that.
That's
And
good.
I've found that that's such a useful phrase, that tell me more. It turns the focus away from you and back onto them, so
Yeah,
that
that's
you can
good.
actively listen, be present with them, and hear what's really going on. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I love what y'all are doing. That's great to hear,
Yeah,
man.
that's good. Thanks.
It's awesome, man. I can even attest to that. The phrase of "tell me more" has been super helpful for me when talking to students, and they're just kind of laying out the things that they're struggling with, and it really helps the conversation and kind of helps them get it out, and then also leads into some good overall conversation. As far as what I've been reading, I have been a long time. Dear listeners know I'm not a huge fan of devotionals because I think a lot of them are pretty shallow. But the one I have found this year that I've been reading that I've actually been quite pleased with, it's very biblical, is the 1 Year Uncommon Life Daily Challenge devotional by Tony Dungy. I'm sure some of you that are into sports, you know who Tony Dungy is, and I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, so give me grace there. Words are hard, including names. But today's devotional was kind of perfect for a lot of different reasons. And it was just talking about really endurance, kind of rooted in Galatians 6, specifically verses 9 and 10, that says, "Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially to those who are of the household of faith." Because I think a lot of times, whether you're a Christian and you're serving at a church on staff, or you're just a lay person, a lay leader, or maybe even if you just aren't even going to church, people get on your nerves sometimes, and it makes it hard to continue to do something that you enjoy doing, or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. There's a lot of us that are gamers that when we play a game in an online lobby and people are just trashing us, makes it hard for us to really be nice to them, but also want to keep playing the game. When you're in a church and you're serving, but there's someone that's just getting on your nerves, it makes it hard to want to continue to serve or even let alone go to that church. But these verses remind us that we shouldn't grow weary of doing good. And this is, here's another aspect of it. Sometimes we're doing good, but we're not really getting recognized for it, or no one's really saying anything about how they appreciate it, or even just a small pat on the back or something, But this verse is reminding us to continue to do good, because really we're doing it for God's glory. We're not doing it for anything else, or at least I hope we're not. But it just kind of it levels you out a little bit in that regard, to where we should continue to do good. We should continue to bring God glory through our actions, through the skill sets that He's given us, through the things that we enjoy doing. And it leads to, it could lead to some pretty cool opportunities. Something that I try to do is like when people, and I don't really stream on Twitch anymore, but when I did, someone came into the chat and was being just kind of trollish or whatever. There's two options I have. There's one where I could be like, I'm gonna stop doing this and just quit, or I can try to have a conversation with that person, maybe go to their Twitch channel, see what games they play, and start talking to them and kind of meet them where they're at, and see what happens from it. There's been a few situations specifically where someone will come into a chat and try to troll, and then I go to their channel and see that they play Apex, and I'll look at some of their clips. I'm like, hey, you actually have some pretty cool clips of Apex on your channel, and that kind of mellows them out, because they're like, oh, I'm seen. Like, this is kind of cool. It opens up opportunities like that. And so it's just, I don't know, especially kind of in ministry. I think a lot of us, especially after last year, we're kind of burnt out in a lot of ways. I think we should all be open to admitting that, if that's kind of where we're at, because best way you're going to deal with burnout is to openly recognize it and then take the steps needed to get past it. But it's one of those things where we just need to recognize that. But it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with, we struggling with our doubt. We need to ask God to give us the strength that we need to continue to do what He's called us to do. Whether that's love people, whether that's preach, that's minister, whatever it is. And so it was a good devotional. It was something that I really, really needed to hear. And that's kind of how all of these devotionals in Tony Dungy's book have been so far. So early reco, 1 year Uncommon Life Daily Challenge by Tony Dungy. But yeah. So let's switch gears into the topic here, and I'm gonna let Adam take the reins here on this. But before we do, just a quick reminder to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app of your choice, iTunes, Podchaser, or whatever it may be. Leave a rating and review. So Adam, man, you brought on Adam Hill on the show. Let's take the reins, man. Guide us on this conversation. Let's get to know Adam a little. Not you, Adam. Y'all know what I mean. Adam, let's get to know Adam.
It's gonna be all kinds of Adams thrown out, but it's good. This is just, I just need a reason. Honestly, we could stop talking now, and my cup runneth over. This has been good, just hanging out with Adam, getting to catch up. But we've got more goodness to even talk about, and so, like we've mentioned, Adam is a game designer and publisher. And so if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you've probably remembered that hooligan Clay Hargrave. We've had him on a couple times to talk both video games and board games. And so I've been meaning. And so when Logan and I were talking, I'm like, we've got to get Adam on here. He's got another game that he coming out that he's had his hand in on developing. And so, but before we get into all that, Adam, I want to just allow you to kind of give us a little bit of a background on how you really got into board gaming, and then really even got into this level of board gaming where it's not just a hobby you really enjoy. It's not your job, but it is. You're designing, you're publishing, you're developing board games. How did we get here?
Well, I've always loved board games. Grew up loving card games, board games. You know, we played the same ones that everyone had in their house. Everyone had in their house growing up. Monopoly, Sorry, Life, Risk, all of those. Loved them and always enjoyed them. And as I grew up, so did the games a little bit. But I remember several years back, someone introduced me to Settlers of Catan.
The gateway drug of board games.
Yes. And I was like, oh man, this is what board games can be like. This is great. And fell in love with it and wanted to play it all the time. And then I just kept stepping further and further into the hobby. And, you know, got really into a game called Terra Mystica, which is heavy. It's big time nerdery. If you're into board games, like this one's deep. And I was loving it. But I remember sitting there with some friends thinking, I could do this. And so confidence I've never lacked for. Math I have lacked for. And I found out that designing board games is basically just making math fun. And so I've gotten a lot better at math lately, but no, it is interesting. But I remember just thinking, I want to make one of these. I want to think that I can, I want to try my hand at this, because what really pulled me into board games is the idea of, and I know this is going to sound really Christian-y, but hey, you brought on a pastor, so this is what you get. The idea of table fellowship, and being able to be present with someone at table is not just about food. Now, I love food, and if you've seen me, you know that. I'm trying not to live so large, but the idea of being at the table with someone, I can spend an hour with someone over a board game who would never set foot in my church.
That's true.
And so I get this opportunity to be present with them and talk about things with them. And it's just such a great opportunity to get to know people and to be able to possibly be that person that God will use to speak into their life over something. And it's just so much fun. And I thought, I want to spend some time trying to do that, trying to make games to see if I can bring people together around a table to do something that will bring them joy, but also bring them deeper relationships. And started trying to make a board game, and had some very basic ideas that I really loved. Started with a good pun for a name, because the game that I started designing was called the Alpacalypse, and it was about alpacas taking over the world after the fall of humanity. And so these alpacas were going to be in charge and take over, and each one of you had an alpaca tribe, and you're going to see if you can be the most influential alpaca tribe. And you have these different types of alpaca that are going to come in and do things. And so that's where it started. And then I was talking about it with a friend of mine, Clayton Hargrave, and I was talking with him, and I was saying, I'm really having trouble figuring out this particular part of the game. And Clay offered up an idea that was a really big unlock mechanically. Now, here's the deal that we didn't know at that moment. None of those ideas made it into the final game. Clay's ideas turned out not to be that good, but
surprising surprise. Yeah.
Come on. No, honestly, hear it out. Clayton, if you're listening, just hear me out. Those ideas didn't work in the ultimate long run, but they were so influential to opening up the creative box of what ended up working that we were like, let's just do this together.
That's cool.
And Godspeed is what it ended up as, and it's about a space agency, and you've already talked about it on the show, and so you're exploring this new planet, and it's a crazy game. It's a blast. It was successful, and we're thankful for it. And I loved working with Clay on it. We'll talk more about that maybe.
It's funny, like, I'm sure you guys have had these with multiple other people in your life, but you have like, no, I mean, there's connections, but because of friendships and stuff, but like it's definitely one of those like proud friend moments where you guys launch your Kickstarter and then it like blows up. And I'm like, again, I'm like, wow, like my friends are doing it. Like it was just super cool seeing the Kickstarter, not only, seeing you guys get your just initial amount, and then just to see you keep hitting stretch goal and stretch goal. I mean, it was just a really fun ride just watching you guys do that. No, but we love Clay, but we love giving him. Clay lived, he was one room over that first year when I lived in Barbier. And so he was living with,
Barbier.
I can't remember his, yeah, we were Barbarians. I was with Christian Eves. I don't know if you knew Christian.
Yes.
And so Christian was my first roommate, and then I can't remember who his roommate was, but me and Clay bonded over our love for the Cowboys, and how Clay was constantly singing in the dorm, which drove me kind of insane
all the time.
But anyways, so like we said, you guys, you hit it off. You and Clay are creating this game. What was that like? You know, we talked a little bit in the pre-show about the idea of designing and then developing a game and having other people kind of come in. Because I remember when it came out, okay, we're getting picked up, we're getting published, and then all of a sudden the game is now Godspeed and not Apocalypse. How hard was that to kind of maybe let some of those things go when you had a lot of people? I mean, you guys knew what you're doing, but you had some people who really knew what they were doing. And coming in and saying, hey, these are some things that we really think you need to be doing.
Well,
what was that process
we had no
like?
clue what we were doing. It was our first time. We were kind of working through it, and thankfully we made a good game. I joke around, what's it like making a game with Clay? Imagine trying to make a really complex board game with a sea lion. No, I'm just playing. He was so fun, and sometimes a little ADD kind of as he thinks through things. But Clay is great for me to work with, and here's one of the reasons I love working with Clay is because Clay has a gift that he can find fun.
Yeah,
like he can sniff it out, man. Whatever you're doing mechanically, he can say, how can we make it funner? Or more fun, and he is so good at making things more fun.
That's cool.
And so, I tend to think more mechanically, and Clay tends to think more experientially, and so we end up being a pretty good team. But we made Apocalypse, and it was testing great with people and playing great with people, and folks loved it, and so we pitched it to the publisher. They really liked it. But then, in board game, there's design and there's development. Design is making a great game. Development is turning that great game into a great product. Because board game publishing is a business. And so our development person and people, John Gilmore was our primary one, and he's awesome. And he developed that game, and they changed the theme to Godspeed because of some feedback they were getting from retailers and from distributors saying the title and theme doesn't really match the experience, because people who want to play a game about alpacas taking over the world don't want that game to take 2 hours. And people who do want to play a game that takes 2 hours don't want to play a game about some hokey thing. Now, I'm not sure that second part's true, but they proposed a theme change. We got an opportunity to interact with that, and it turned out to be a really great theme for the game, Godspeed. We are super glad with the work Pandasaurus did with it. And so that's been awesome. And watching it do well was super fun, and doing it with a friend was great. I will say working with a friend can be tough, design-wise, because, it's the old... it's the old adage, fewer moving parts is fewer broken pieces. And it is, when you're working with a friend in a creative enterprise that is also business oriented, differences in opinion and differences in ideas can really start to drive a wedge. And the communication part is really critical. And all of us fail at that at some level. But, especially in game design and stuff, when we were staying up to like 1 and 2 and 3 a.m. working on this thing, I can tell you most of the fights happened between 1 and 3 because we were just tired.
Nothing good happens after midnight, Adam.
Right. Nothing Christian after midnight. I get it. But we would just say something in a way that was careless and the other person. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance, and you just have to keep, every now and then you just got to take a break and remind yourself that you really do love this person. and that you'd rather be their friend than their business partner any day, and kind of resettle things, and then you can keep going in ways that are healthy. And Clay and I had those moments, but it ended up being really great.
That's cool. I can, Logan's probably thinking, me and him had probably some of those moments when we were living together where it's like, all right, who's about to do these dishes? Because if somebody doesn't do them soon, we're gonna have some problems. But
No, man, we were great roommates, man. No problems at all.
but no, that's really cool to hear. And I love what you say about Clay, because I think that's like about Clay and making things more fun. I mean, that's just kind of Clay in general, right? Clay is a guy who he's always had one of those infectious personalities where you just love being around him because he makes life more fun. And so I could see how bringing that to even the board game table would be a lot of fun. But Clay can also be,
I don't want to suggest he's not a good designer mechanically. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
In game,
yeah.
He's good at it. But in particular, he's exceptionally good at saying about taking a mechanic that is kind of core to the game and saying, and what if we did this too? And not caring about how we figure that out. We'll figure it out later. And in my mind, I'm like, you just broke everything. But he makes it better in the long run. So cool. He really is good.
Well, hey, let's transition some, because you've now been a part of, I want to make sure I said you've designed a game. You've now been a part of developing and about to publish. I don't know if you consider it published yet. About to publish, or you have published kind of your second game. It's called Three Sisters. Right. It was designed by two other Rochester guys. I'm familiar with Ben just because of his wife, but I don't know Matt. I don't think I've ever met Matt.
Matt Riddle and Ben Pinchback are both engineers that work at the same place. They're best friends growing up. And so they are the designers. Actually, there's a game that they did called Fleet.
Yeah. I've looked into it, but I figured I'd give Three Sisters a try first, and then we'll look at Fleet.
I hear you, and I appreciate that. But Ben and Matt have designed a whole bunch of games. I think they've got 15 or 16 published games at this point. They've been in this a lot longer. As a matter of fact, when Clayton and I were first starting, we sat down with them and talked with them about how do we do this? How do we stay friends? How do you run the business side of it? They've been super awesome. They're just great guys and great friends. And Matt and Ben were putting together a publishing company, and I asked if I could join them because that's something I would be interested in. Kind of a retirement job kind of things down the road. I'm just thinking, what is something I can keep doing to keep busy and stay in the hobby that I love, but not necessarily take up all my time. And so I started thinking about publishing, and so joined them and bought in there. And so we've got this publishing company called Motor City Gameworks. And Motor City Gameworks, particularly, we work with what are called loaded roll-and rights. And I'll talk more about roll-and-write here in a moment. But basically, we make these games that are a particular type of game, and Three Sisters is one of those. Now, roll-and-write is where you roll dice and then write down on a piece of paper. So think Yahtzee.
But now, is this considered output, whatever we were talking earlier?
Okay, this would be input randomness. It's the kind of people like. Input randomness is where you roll dice and then you do something with those dice, and it usually ends up writing on a piece of paper. Now, you think like Yahtzee, but think Yahtzee on steroids and crack. Because these are way more difficult than Yahtzee.
Everything's better on, crack, right?
100%, right? That's a truism. Don't do drugs.
There we go. We got it out there.
All right.
For legal reasons, that's a joke.
There you go. Exactly. So here we go. But we've got these roll-and rights that are basically big-time strategy games, like Euro games like Godspeed, only we've boiled it down to where you get the experience just by rolling dice and marking things off on a sheet. And you're still making these big choices, these meaty decisions that provide a lot of fun. Well, Three Sisters is one of those, and it's about companion planting and backyard gardening, which I know backyard gardening is super exciting to a lot of people, but this is what board games can do that video games can't. We can take a game like that and make it interesting. But what it is three sisters. The three sisters are from indigenous persons. When they would plant corn, beans, and squash together. And the corn provides a lattice work that the beans can climb. The beans put nitrogen in the soil, which is great for the corn. And then the squash provides a ground cover so that pests and other things don't mess with the beans and the corn. And so those three things grow really well together. So basically, you're growing a backyard garden, and you have to make all these decisions about when to plant and what you're planting, and there's all what kind of equipment to use and all of that. And it's actually it's one of the coolest games I've ever played in that regard. And it's not even one I designed. I did help develop a few things. We have a weather expansion that you could get with Kickstarter, but it went really well. The Kickstarter did. We had over 3,400 backers, again, which is a lot in board gaming. And so basically what I take from that is that I am a stone cold lock for Kickstarter success.
2 for 2, baby.
And they're both super successful. So basically, if you have me in your project,
you want them in your corner. No, I'm really excited to check it out because, it's you say it's loaded in your decision making, but it's all from kind of rolling that dice. And after playing your other game, Godspeed, I don't think it's going to be 30 minutes of setup. And so that alone has me pretty excited that I'm not going to be.
Okay,
all right, guys.
I love designing roll and writes is because you can take it out of the box and be playing within like 2 minutes.
And I'm a lot of the games that I've been getting here recently, I'm just like Jonathan Steele's another dear listener, really getting into board games here over the last couple of years. He got me into Wingspan. I'm sure.
Oh, great game.
Yeah, and so, but it's another one where there's pieces all over the place. You got to like build a bird feeder, and I'm like, what is happening with these games? But again, these things just take time. So I'm really excited just to try out because, when I saw the dice, I'm like, okay, is it gonna be like a Yahtzee where I'm really dependent on the dice and that maybe that luck aspect because I've never played a roll and write. So I'm really excited to get to try this one. To try this one out. And so why don't you let the listeners know, I know the Kickstarter is done. And I think if I'm remembering getting some of the emails, I don't think they can currently get it, but when does it come out and what are some ways that they could be looking out for it maybe in the coming months?
All right. We're, right now, if everything works out, we've just sent the files to our manufacturer. They're printing everything and doing all that stuff. They'll box it. And then it's got to go from there to get on a boat. It has to travel across the sea from China to us.
Not through the Suez Canal.
And that's the big question mark, is how long shipping and freight will take. As you saw, for about 5 days, the Suez Canal was blocked. And since then, global shipping has been a nightmare. Being able to figure out when things will get where exactly. And then because of COVID, a lot of those harbors have been so understaffed that they can't get through all the containers and can't clear everything to customs nearly fast enough. And so stuff is just sitting there for weeks and months.
It's crazy.
And so right now it looks like we're going to be able to make a September or October shelf date where it will hit shelves. It's technically going to be fulfilled to our Kickstarter people around September. However, shortly after that, we're just finishing up contract talks with another partner that is going to handle distribution and retail sales of the game. And so if people were going to look at buying Three Sisters, you can buy the retail version for $30 in stores, probably in September, October.
I'm just looking forward to the day when I see it's going to be like Spike Lee. It's going to be an Adam Hill joint. And where do I go right now? And again, this is naive, but every time I go to Target, I go to the video game section first, and then I make my way over to the board game because surprisingly, Target does a decent job of having some games out there.
Target does a good job. Now, I got to make shorter games because Target doesn't carry anything longer than an hour.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, if it says longer than an hour on the box, they're not going to carry it. But
Well,
They do have a good collection of games.
yeah. Well, they're definitely not going to have that Mad Scientist game on there
They're
because
not.
we were talking about that in the pre-show. It's the audacity to say this game's going to take over 3 hours to play.
I love it.
It's just, it blows
Dude,
my
I
mind.
love the estimated time on playing because there are some games that do it really well. Like, they'll say like, this is going to take 60 to 90 minutes and they nail it. And then there's
like Bees. Bees is a game that you told me to get. That was an Adam Hill stamped recommendation. Hey, you should try this game called Bees.
Yeah.
And that game does a good job of estimating how long the game should take.
Yes, it nails it. And then I saw one though that was like this. How long will it take? And it was 25 to 190 minutes. And I was like, do you really have no clue?
That it's like these guys that create a game called Godspeed, and they're like, you can play it in an hour and a half, and it took 3 hours.
Yeah, it's so nuts. Yeah, Godspeed. Don't listen to that. That 90 minutes on that box is just not true.
Well, Adam, I want to kind of transition to just some of what you've already been doing. I mean, just as you've been talking about clay, we often talk about, okay, we want to filter all that we do through our Christian worldview, through this Christian lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so we often talk about that in regards to board gaming, either things we're learning, things we're taking away. And I want to approach kind of the way that you've done board gaming and designing, developing, publishing, and ask some of those similar questions. So what would you say some of those takeaways as you've been designing and developing board games, maybe some of these takeaways, large takeaways that God has taught you throughout that process that you've been able to kind of apply either to, to your walk with the Lord, to your family, to relationships. What are, if you've got a couple of those, maybe takeaways that God has taught you over the last couple of years?
Yeah. Okay. Game design. Probably the biggest lesson I've learned from game design is kind of described with the phrase "fail faster." And basically, Samuel Beckett, playwright, had a quote where he said, "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better." And what he means, that kind of, if I were to talk about it in terms of game design, is iteration is key. Get stuff out of your head and put it actually on the table. Like make a prototype as quickly as you can. It doesn't have to look pretty. All you're going to do is see if it works, right? So you're going to figure out what's wrong with it. And you're going to fail faster, but it has to look like something. Well, in the same way, life kind of works like that too. Don't simply let your faith sit in your head. Put it into practice. Try it. Actually live this thing. Don't just talk about loving your neighbor. Go and meet your neighbor. And when you mess up at meeting your neighbor and you're like, geez, I didn't do that really well, I'm going to learn from that, you'll be better at it the next time. Right? And so it's you got to get things out of your head, because what the Christian life is, we're not simply brains on a stick. Right? But we have a whole body. We have a whole life that God wants us to glorify him with. And so don't be afraid to try. Make your faith look like something, right? Not just think like something. And so practice it, because practice is the only way to get it better. All right. To grow in it is to actually put it into practice and let God work through that. God can do amazing things. I mean, God fed 5,000 people, with just a few fish and a few pieces of bread, but give him something to work with sometimes. I think people want to see these miracles of faith, but they're not willing to actually put their faith into practice to see that miracle happen. It is really interesting just to think about in terms of, making sure that it looks like something, that you actually try to do something. Grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning. Right? You're supposed to try. You're supposed to try not to sin. You're supposed to try and do the right thing. You're supposed to help others. You're supposed to love your neighbor. You're supposed to, all those things you're supposed to work at. You're supposed to work out your faith with fear and trembling, but not because you're earning anything. Grace is not opposed to effort, though. Right? We are supposed to try in this life, because that's what we're here to do, is to actually live this way, not just think a certain way.
I like
That's
that.
real good.
I'm sure Logan's thinking, as
Yeah.
he often is teaching his students, about sharing our faith. How often do we talk about it? But how often do we go out and try? I mean, even us, how often I've left a conversation thinking, "Oh my goodness, I just I just butchered that conversation with that guy." But okay, I'm gonna be more equipped and ready next time because I tried, and even if I failed. And so I don't know if you got anything you want to add to that, Logan.
I was gonna say, I mean, this has been, I mean, just sitting here listening to this, it's funny because this has been a common talking point on Wednesday nights with my students is, and this is something I brought up several times in the last few weeks, is like, because I have a lot of students who are into athletics, and I always tell them that you all know that when you started doing athletics, you knew you weren't very good at it at the start, but because of that frustration and those flaws that were coming out, you didn't just shy away from it. You leaned into it and worked on those and got better. And it's the same thing in your Christian walk. If you're always going to just sit there and be afraid of messing up a conversation about sharing the gospel and stuff like that, you'll never share it. But that shouldn't be the reason why you don't ever share it or you don't ever live out your faith. You should lean into it. And if you mess something up, it's okay. God will work through your flaws and stuff. I mean, I mess up words all the time, whether it's on this podcast or I'm preaching or just talking to people. And yet somehow God still manages to work through the bumblings of a skinny dude from Illinois, and it's something I tell my students all the time. It's like you guys don't shy away from adversity or whatever in any other aspect of your life. Why would you do it with your Christian faith?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
And I mean, I like Dwight Moody when people were questioning and really critical of the way that he was practicing evangelism. His response was awesome. He said, okay, but I like the way I do evangelism better than the way you don't.
Love it. Yeah. I love that sassiness, man. I really, really do. That's like sometimes I'll have parents who maybe not sometimes, but there's been a few occasions where some parents will be like, "Well, I don't think kids should be playing video games." I'm like, "Okay, well, I've had great conversations with students playing video games. Some of these kids won't even come to a church because they're afraid they'll be judged." And that's where they're at. So I'm gonna go where they're at and enjoy it. And you can be upset that your kid's playing video games, but that's their zone. That's their safe space. That's
Yeah.
their ground. That's where they feel, comfortable. And so instead of wishing your kid didn't play video games, how's about you sit down and play a game with them? Or maybe even just watch them play and ask questions
Yep.
and see kind of what kind of conversations come out of that, because you can sit there and wish your kids stop playing video games all you want, but that's what my parents did, and here I am, and I started a podcast talking about video games. So chances are this isn't going away. Get used to it. Meet them where they're at. I mean, it's what Paul did.
Yep.
When Paul was preaching the gospel, he went to the Areopagus, Pagus, probably mispronouncing it. And as he was going there, he took note of the different statues in the city and was like, "Guys, I see you have these statues that say to the unknown God. Well, I'm here to tell you I know who that God is." He used
Yeah.
their cultural markers to bring in the gospel. And that's kind of what we do on this podcast. We use gaming to bring that into things, and we try not to be cheesy about it. But it's easy to do.
It
You
is.
just do it.
What I love about, again, a lot of what Adam's been saying, this idea of getting people to the table. Food. I'll often say everybody's got to eat, so it's an easy way to get people for a moment because they're gonna eat at some point. But what I would love to be a fly on the wall is, or even knowing guys like Adam, guys like Clay, Matt and Ben, we've got people going to these gaming conferences,
Yeah.
and they're meeting people all around the world who like we've been saying, some people who would never step into the doors of the church, but they'll sit and play a board game with these guys and get to know them, and relationships can develop. I mean, I love that the guy can redeem our hobbies if we allow him to. We could just be board gamers. We could just be gamers. And I'm not even saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that. but I want God to be redeeming all these things I do, even things that are just hobbies. And so I love knowing that a guy like Adam Hill is at a board game conference, meeting people and loving on them. And they're going to ask, well, what do you do in your day job? And he's like, well, I'm a pastor. And they're like, hold up, what? They would have I had no idea. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing how when people find that out about you, how much they'll share. It's like all of a sudden they've just got to start confessing their life to you. And it's like, okay, you didn't have to do that, but let me encourage you in some way without it getting too weird. But well, Adam, let me ask this question. I got two more questions. One serious, one not so serious, or maybe you think it is serious. But the first one, again, we often talk about
That's ominous.
We often talk about how as husbands, as dads, as pastors, we love video games, but we want to keep that balance proper. We want to make sure that we're handling our responsibilities, and that okay, when we're able, we take part in these other hobbies and recreation, these good gifts that God has given us. And so I can only imagine with board games, there's even almost another layer of involvement and investment, because I mean, we've said some games can be a half hour, but some games can be 3 hours. And once you're in, you're in. So how would you say, whether it's either playing and or designing, developing, how have you balanced that with with your family, with your different roles and responsibilities, and making sure that you've never allowed that to get maybe to position it shouldn't, or becoming idolatry? How have you been able to kind of balance that? Because I think, again, just for our listeners, as we try to do that in gaming, there's no doubt going to be some takeaways that we can be always trying to grow in this area.
That's a huge important question with balance. In terms of games, kind of the way I say it to my son, who's 14, right, is I say, Cooper, it is great to play games. It is not okay to let games play you. And what I mean by that is you have to maintain control, whether it's, and in video games, you can get the video game rage, right? You can't, when that game starts playing you is when you stop being Christian while you're playing. And you kind of, I talk about also though in time, you let the game, play the game and enjoy the game, but don't let the game play you. Don't let it dominate your life. It's not in control. It's an opportunity for you to have fun, for you to enjoy what it is that you're doing, but don't let it control you. And you can become addicted to good things, right, really easily. And so you have to be really careful about some of that. And one of the ways that I do that is, you're talking about choosing your priorities. For me, I keep my life honestly pretty simple. And what I mean by that is I don't get into too many things. I love God and the church. And so I give my life, my professional life, I spend talking about God, whether I'm preaching at the church or I'm teaching at the university. My work is all about talking about God. When I'm not at work, I only have a handful of hobbies. My family, spending time with my family is such a natural expression of what I love in this world. That becomes, the thing I do. With that, I'm also blessed though, because here's two things. One is I have a 14-year-old who sometimes wants to be around me and sometimes doesn't. And as a parent, I can tell you there's challenges in that phase, but it's also pretty sweet if you're a gamer. Because he's doing his thing and you can do your thing.
My 1-year-old doesn't feel the same.
No,
way. Neither does my 3-year-old. She wants me to push on the swing 24/7, and so I'm like, please, just give me.
Exactly. There are times when the 14-year-old doesn't want to hang out with us, and that's okay. Second thing I'm blessed with is my wife, Kelly. She's amazing. Now, a few things. One is, in addition to her just being an amazing person, one is her interests line up with mine some. My wife loves board games. And so we get to play. She's my favorite person to play board games with. She almost always wins.
Amen.
And that is really frustrating. But nevertheless, she is so fun to be with, and she enjoys that hobby. There are a lot of folks that their partner or their spouse doesn't hang out with them, and they don't do the same games. But my spouse likes to do the same thing as me in that regard. We both like games. And so that's really cool. That helps with time. But also, when we talk about the other thing that's been really helpful is Kelly works nights. She's a nurse and always has worked nights. And so she will leave usually about 8 o'clock and get home around 8 o'clock. And so after Cooper goes to bed, I'm kind of on my own to pursue things like making board games. And so Clay would come over around 9 and we would design until like 3. And so, but my hobbies are like, I don't have many hobbies. Like the things I do are design board games, play board games, read, and do work.
Yeah.
Like that's what I do. And so part of it is just simplicity. And I know not everyone's wired that way, but for me, that's really worked.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, Logan can probably speak to this as good as anybody can in regard being a youth pastor, and this is one thing that I'm kind of, Hannah and I kind of grieve coming, knowing that, well, at the time the Lord's not leading us to overseas international missions, because we were really in some ways looking forward to that simple life, because you just don't have the things, the non-stopness of life that you have in the United States, usually in a lot of overseas contexts. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't have that here, but you have to be so intentional about it, or it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, or
and so like you have
something like a pandemic.
Yeah, or that.
Because we found all kinds of simplicity real fast. And it was funny because at first it was like, hey, you can't go out, you can't do anything, you've got to stay at home. And here I am looking at these hundreds of board games on my shelves going, I have never been more prepared for a situation.
We were made for this, Kelly. We were made for it.
That's right. This is what I was put here for.
I've always wanted to be put on house arrest, but I didn't want to break the law. This is about as close as I can get. No, that's good. Well, hey, Adam, it's been great having you on. But before we finish up this conversation, now this is probably an extremely loaded question, because you could go off the rails, and you probably want to ask even more questions after I ask the question, because you've done this. I've come to you on Twitter and asked this.
Yes.
But if you were going to give our listeners 3 recommendations, 3 games that they should check out besides Godspeed, besides Three Sisters, what would be 3 games that you would say, hey, just again, I don't want to give any preface, because as soon as I say something, you could change your answer. So you can take that however you want. What would be 3 games that you would recommend to our dear listeners that they should check out?
So I'm going to make 2 lists, but I'll do it quickly. One of those lists is going to be for people who are fairly new to board games, okay, who don't play a lot of board games. If you don't play a lot of board games, the 3 that I would tell you to try, I would have you try a game called, this is so hard. This is tough. I'm going to go with a game called Azul, Azul.
Yeah.
And if I could pick one of those, it'd be what's called the Summer Pavilion. There's three different kinds of Azul. The latest one is Summer Pavilion. I think it's excellent. And I think that it's accessible for kind of first-time gamers or beginning gamers. So I would say Azul Summer Pavilion. I'm going to say you need a little bit of familiarity for this one, but there's a game called Quacks of Quedlinburgs. And it's super dumb fun.
It's been on my Amazon wish list. Actually, my mom bought me the expansion pack on accident, not the original game for Christmas. Well, and so
it's great. You play a witch doctor who's making these fake potions for people, and you're throwing ingredients in the pot. And if you put too much of the wrong kind of ingredient in the pot, it blows up. It's great. It's just super fun. And you've got a bag, and you're just throwing chips in the bag for all your ingredients, and then you draw them out randomly. Bag building is so much fun. So Quacks of Quedlinburg is a great game. A lot of people really love that. And then if I were to choose one more for beginners,
You can tell he's looking at his board game list right now. He's looking at the closet.
Oh man, it's so hard to choose, but let me go with one from my buddies, Matt and Ben, the guys that I publish with, and choose one of their games and go with Ladder 29. It's a card game, and it's what's called a ladder climber, and it's fantastic, super fun game. I think it's one of Clayton's favorites actually.
Nice.
But I'll go with a card game because people like card games. So there, I've given your beginner's list. Now,
right,
if you're already a board gamer and you like more serious board games, I'm going to give you 3 real quick. One is a game called Newton, in which you're like Isaac Newton. You're a designer, or you're a scientist, a creator, a thinker, and you travel, and the theme doesn't matter. This game is just great gameplay. It's good Euro play. So Newton is a great game. There's another game, Heaven and Ale, that is you're monks and you are brewing beer. And you have
the Reform Brethren in our group are going to love it.
Yes, they will. Heaven and Ale, and your garden grows magically. Like you can grow hops, you can grow wheat, but you can also grow like water and money. So don't worry about that. But it's great. Heaven and Ale is such a great game. And then my favorite game all time is a game called Russian Railroads. And it is serious business, but it is great. So those are the 3 that I recommend for your heavier gamers.
Yeah, I've asked you this, and I've looked up a lot of them. I usually add them to an Amazon wish list, and then I keep an eye on the price. Yeah. You almost sold me on a game. You know, we were laughing about, you know, designs of games, like one's about planting a garden. The one you were talking about today was about riverboats. I'm like, you can make a board game just about just about anything, and so
yes,
it's always interesting kind of seeing
so here's what's funny. Y'all were talking about this earlier. Y'all, when you said, "Do you even know what's going on in the story?" and Logan was like, "I have no clue what's going on in the story." But the sentence right before that was, "It's really great gameplay and it's really great theme." And yet, so board games have the same thing, right? There's mechanics and mechanisms, and then there's theme. And ideally, those line up. But the truth is, in some games, it's just great mechanics with no theme. Like Splendor is a good example of great mechanics and 3 sentences of theme.
Every time we play Wingspan, I'm like, we're going to play a game that's about birds. And they're like, a game about birds? And then they start playing and they're like, okay, this is really good. Yeah. But they didn't, you know, the idea of playing a game about birds didn't sell them.
No,
but once they start playing it, it's always cool.
But some people really get into it. Bird watchers, bird enthusiasts, love it. But no, theme is interesting because, you know, ideally your actions will, you know, what you're doing in the game will line up with the theme, but it doesn't have to in order to make it a great game.
Well, Adam, it's been great having you on tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Logan, I'll let you kind of close this out.
Yeah, and dear listeners, just so you know, there will be links in your show notes to all of those games that Adam just mentioned. So if you're interested in checking out the 3 beginner games, or even the 3 games for more experienced players, those will be linked into your show notes, so you can check those out for yourself and maybe pick some up. Just look, if you buy them on Amazon and your wife gets mad at you, or your husband, whoever's doing the buying, don't blame us, okay? It's all you. It's all you. We just made it a lot easier for you to do that. That being said, this is the 2nd episode of the month. And so before we head out, we got to thank our patrons, the lovely folks who support us over on Patreon.com that help us keep the lights on, keep the controllers charged, and keep the fridge stocked with Red Bull so I can go on those platinum trophy hunts. So we're going to go ahead and thank those folks who support us for the month of May over on Patreon. And those folks are Alex Castellanos, Andre Swann, Ashley Kronenbitter, Christopher Commander, Darryl Tavares,
David B., David Henderson, David Matthews, Derek Smith, Isaac.stultz,
Jake Walker, James Barker, Jeff Jackson Jr., Jimmy Changa, JoAnne Monroe,
Josh Broccolo, Kokorodaki, Mark Fromme, Matt Edwards, Matthew White Chocolate McDougal,
Matt Millsap, Melvin Benson the fifth, Micah Hendrick, Michael Toller, MrButts,
Nate McKeever, the Peter Piper, Retro Rewind Podcast, Ryan 1701E, and Sam White.
Samuel Colunga, third strongest mole, Travis, WeathermanKeef, Wesley Ray, Xaviel, Medina. Y'all, thank you so much for supporting us over on patreon.com and helping us continue to get to do what we do on the show and provide great content to you and also introduce you to some awesome guest hosts and some of their games. Speaking of, Adam Hill, thanks again, man, for coming on the show. Before we let you go, so what are some things that our dear listeners should check out besides the board games that are linked in their show notes?
I think if I could recommend anything, first off, go take a look at MotorCityGameworks.com, and you can see all that our publishing company is doing. But also, something that made me laugh, something that kind of made my wife and I chuckle this week. Nate Bargatze is a comedian. He has a Netflix special called The Greatest Average American, and it's pretty funny. We really enjoyed it, so maybe check that out.
I might be wrong on this, but you guys have done a couple podcast episodes for Motor City Gameworks, right?
We have. Nowhere near episode 191, but we're we're on episode 3 coming up to record this week. So
nice. So you guys can go check that out. That's a little, side recommendation. Are you guys on any podcast services or just through your website right now?
Well, we're through the website. We're also we're on several, but iTunes doesn't like our artwork, and so I'm working on that.
So I'm going to go ahead and take that one as mine, is check out the Motor City Gameworks podcast. I didn't think about it much before, so I'm kind of slacking, but so be it.
Fair.
Any of those games that Adam recommended.
There you go. We'll just re-echo those.
Steal those recos.
So as far as my recos go, I already mentioned one earlier, the 1 Year Income on Life Daily Challenge Devotional by Tony Dungy. I just now realized that is a mouthful of a title of a book. But the other thing that is not really a mouthful is the new Super Mario 3D World that's on the Nintendo Switch, specifically Bowser's Fury, because we were kind of talking about that in the pre-show about how, like, man, what would happen if they took Bowser from Super Smash Bros., kind of the more souped up, crazy version, and put him in a game. And fun fact, there is a game like that, and there's also Super Saiyan Mario in there as well. So definitely check that out if you have a Nintendo Switch. But those are going to be my 2 recos. Adam, are you on social media? Do you want folks to follow you, or
sure.
you want
they can find me at Adam Hill Games on Twitter. And then I do have an Instagram where I put a meme every so often, maybe once or twice a week. Family-friendly meme just to make people laugh. And if they want to do that, then they can find me, let's see, at N Adam Hill. The letter N and then Adam Hill. It is Nadam Hill is what it looks like.
I think Adam mentioned this a little bit earlier. If we follow you on Twitter, you kind of need to be careful because we know you recommend a lot of games. So
yeah,
we'll have to
follow at your own risk.
Yeah.
Make sure that your spouse is okay with your purchases before you go crazy.
And speaking of that, you got to make sure that your spouse is okay with purchases. I've already cleared it with all y'all spouses. You guys can go to the merch shop for TRG, get yourself a TRG mug, get yourself a TRG hat or t-shirt. It's summertime. You're gonna need a t-shirt to, I don't know, to wear and stuff. Or you're gonna go outside, right? If you go outside, look, you're gonna need a t-shirt.
You do need t-shirts to wear if you're gonna.
That's
go
what
outside.
I do with my shirts.
I'm just saying that
helpful.
You usually wear them, but yeah, maybe you're not going to go outside. Maybe you just want to listen to some great content, and you can support us over on patreon.com and get early uncut access to all of our episodes and get some extra perks from that as well over on Patreon. But you can also interact with us on a variety of platforms. Really, if you just go to thereformedgamers.com, you'll get links to our Facebook page, Facebook group, Twitter, Instagram, Discord server. If I'm forgetting one, a link to it will be on the website. So be sure to check that out. Links will also be in your show notes. We'd love to connect with you over on there. Adam, again, thank you for joining us on this episode and kind of sharing some of your, really how you got into this, but also just kind of how you inject your faith into this hobby as well. It's we're kindred spirits in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. Great conversation.
You're welcome. Well, dear listeners, until next time, be a deer, keep it locked here, and we'll see you in the next episode.